The one where Phoebe hates PBS is such a thought-provoking episode of Friends because whenever I watch this, whenever I'm reminded of this episode, I always try and think of a selfless good deed. And honestly, I don't think I've ever come across one, and we will explore this in the episode a little bit more. But if you have any suggestions for a selfless good deed, please do let me know. This is the 4th episode of the 5th season of Friends. It's directed by Shelley Jensen, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I talk about the episode and share some thoughts along the way. I'm going to go through this one chronologically. Sometimes with Friends, my notes are grouped by part of the narrative, but with this one, it made sense to go through it in order. And it starts off with Rachel knocking on Monica's bedroom door, and it's very clear that she's been waiting for a guy, as she puts it, and she very quickly thinks on her feet and tells Rachel that she's seeing a guy from work. And it does make me wonder why they decide to keep their, I don't want to use the word relationship at this point, but why Monica and Chandler are still going around in secret, because it must be a really heavy burden. And if this is something they're going to continue doing, I won't say what happens in any future episodes, but I feel like at some point you can tell your best friends, but we'll explore that more as the show progresses. Joey and Ross then come in, and Ross is trying to reach Emily still, and then Chandler comes over with champagne and very quickly has to think on his feet. And there, in that opening, we have all of the main aspects of the narrative established, which is a pretty decent way to set things up. Joey then comes over in the next scene, and he's dressed very smartly. I think he looks brilliant, and he's actually co-hosting, he believes, a telethon with PBS. And Phoebe says that she hates PBS because she wrote to Sesame Street shortly after her mother died. And I feel like, unless I'm missing something, there's a bit of an issue with this, because she said all she got was a lousy keychain, and by that point she was living in a box. So how did she get her mail if she was living in a box? I don't know, is it possible to forward her mail somewhere? I feel like that service would cost, and if you're living in a box, that's probably not money you have to spare. I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking it. I don't think I'd ever thought that before when watching this episode, but obviously as I'm watching it to analyse it, that is something that stood out to me. Am I overlooking something? Please let me know if I am. We then have the discussion that there is no selfless good deed, and Phoebe makes it her mission in this episode to find a selfless good deed, and we'll talk about some of her attempts in a little bit. Emily then returns Ross's call, only to tell him to stop harassing her relatives. And even though I've seen this episode many, many times, I feel like that phone call is still quite dramatic, because Ross has been trying to reach her for quite a few episodes now, and it almost seems unexpected. And it's also the scene where Ross hands the lamp to Chandler, which apparently was something that wasn't in the script, and David Schwimmer just did it. I don't know if he did it during the taping or if it was in a rehearsal, then they decided to keep it in, but either way, that was apparently a David Schwimmer thing, which is pretty great if true. We're then briefly down at Central Perk, and we have a brief discussion about Monica's new boyfriend, and Ross explains that Emily is willing to work things out if he moves to London. And I think that's completely unreasonable, because they've already had this discussion that Ross can't leave because of Ben, whereas Emily was already planning on moving to New York. So I think, not for the first time, Emily is being very unreasonable. We're then at the telethon, and Joey is actually taking pledges. He finds out he's not the co-host, he's just answering calls, and he tries to look on the bright side. He's still going to have television exposure, but he's out of the frame of the camera. So it's not going great for Joey. Chandler, we are then at Monica's apartment, and Chandler asks Monica if her new boyfriend is better in bed than Richard. And I feel like, on the one hand, Chandler is having fun with this, but this is also the first time that they're really talking about their relationship in front of other people, even though they're not really talking about it, which I do think is a step forward. I do think we are moving slightly forward with their relationship, and I feel like after a couple of episodes of this, the timing there is pretty good, and we have that brilliant scene, or that brilliant moment, where Chandler is dancing on the coffee table. I feel like that clip comes up a lot in compilations, and rightly so. It's a really brilliant moment. Ross is then on the phone with Emily, and he tells her he can't move without Ben. And Rachel, wow, Emily, that's awkward. Emily starts to talk about Rachel, but she doesn't say her name. She just calls her, catching our plane with her. And it's almost like the name is poison to her and she can't say it. And on the one hand, I don't blame her for being mad at the situation, but what did Rachel do wrong? Rachel did nothing wrong. Granted, she went to London to try and tell Ross she still loved him. That would have been wrong. But all Rachel did was, slightly underdressed, attend the wedding. So it's not really fair for Emily to be this bitter to the extent where she can't even say Rachel's name. And there we have another reason why Emily is not a good person. I absolutely despise this character, even though some of the Emily episodes, at least of this season, are actually some of my favourites. But she is a horrible, horrible character. And she gives Ross the ultimatum, we can work on our marriage if you don't see Rachel again. Now, that part I don't think is horrendously unreasonable, because if I was in Emily's shoes and I was worried that my new husband was in love with his friend, I would be concerned about them spending time together. But do I think it's as black and white as being able to say, we can stay married if you stop seeing that person, or should there be more of a discussion? I don't know. I'm not completely against what Emily has said there, but I feel like there are better ways of going about it. And Phoebe then phones the telethon, and this is her first selfless good deed. She let a bee sting her, and Joy points out that the bee probably died after that. All I can think of there is, what if it had been a wasp? Isn't it true that wasps don't die after they sting, but bees do? In fact, I'm going to Google this. Okay, so no, wasps don't die after they sting. So if she'd let a wasp sting her, it could have worked. But at the same time, is it a good deed? Is there actually any benefit to wasps stinging? I Googled that, and I'm not getting any strong results for that. They sting basically to just defend themselves and get rid of threats. So I don't think there would be any benefit if Phoebe let a wasp sting her. So it wouldn't really be a good deed as such. So that train of thought basically went absolutely nowhere. Ross is then trying to use a magic 8-ball to decide his fate. It's not working. And then Phoebe makes another attempt at a selfless good deed. And she gives Joy, or she pledges $200, which she didn't want to do because she was saving up to buy a hamster, which I think is fantastic. And unfortunately, her pledge made them surpass, I think, last year's total. And because Joey took the pledge, he got to go on television, and Phoebe felt fantastic. So it was not a selfless good deed. But honestly, I would argue that donating money at all is never selfless, even if you were saving up to buy something, because you still feel good. Most people are going to feel good about donating money. So I don't think that was very viable either. And I can't think of anything that would be a selfless good deed. Maybe there is one, but I feel like just the act of doing a good deed is always going to make a person feel at least a little bit good or happy with it. So that's never going to be completely selfless. Even if the motivation isn't selfish, I feel like people will get something good out of it. And I guess that's kind of the point. But either way, I've thought about this frequently ever since whenever I first watched this episode 2 decades ago or whatever, and I always think it's pretty interesting. We then go to Ross, and Rachel's turned up at his apartment. Ross is busy pulling apart the magic 8-ball, trying to find answers, and Rachel tells him to just give Emily whatever it is that she wants to make the marriage work. And of course, Rachel doesn't know what Emily wants, and Emily's on the phone, and with Rachel's prompting, Ross said, that thing you want me to do, I can do it. And Rachel thinks it's a happy moment, and she hugs Ross, and the hug is painful to see, because I don't think anybody wants Ross to do this. It doesn't help that Emily, in my opinion, is a despicable character. I don't necessarily think she's wrong to be hurt by what happened at the ceremony. I think she's got every right to be hurt, but there are very few things about her that make her a good person, and thinking of Ross not being around Rachel in favour of a negative person, it's painful to think about. We then end with Chandler and Monica being busy in Central Perk, and it's a light-hearted way to end things. The one where Phoebe hates PBS has some really, really strong moments in it. A lot of great moments from Chandler. It's nice to have a slight step forward with Chandler and Monica, and the role Phoebe and Joey played I thought was, well, obviously definitely quite fascinating. And while it's nice to have some progression with Ross finally getting in touch with Emily, it's not exactly a direction that I imagine anybody would want this to go in. So a really great episode with a lot of mixed emotions, but ultimately the one where Phoebe hates PBS is certainly an enjoyable episode to watch.